Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I want the truth!
Why don't you answer him?
Welcome to an episode of Objection, Your Fiction, and Pop Goes to Legal. I think this is a crossover episode because it hits elements of both. And we are excited to have with us today Jason Roche. Jason is a documentary filmmaker and the Associate Professor of Communication Studies at the University of Detroit, Mercy. And as I just found out seconds before we started, a fellow alum of the Newhouse School at Syracuse. So now this podcast is even more important to me than it was before. Jason, thanks so much for being here today.
Glad to be here.
So we are going to talk about, Raquel, is it a Phenom? The Netflix documentary Unknown Number, which I didn't know anything about until this podcast was booked and watched last night in full. Raquel, would you call this like I don't know what's going on with trendy things. Is this a trendy show?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a moment. It's capturing, I think, a moment in time also on social media. I watched it because it came across my TikTok. It came across on my TikTok For You page. And I sort of saw the reveal and I was like, oh, I have to watch this documentary now. And that's sort of why I watched it. But I'm also not like a true crime junkie, but it definitely is something that interests me. So it sort of, for me, hit the nose on both of like being part of the conversation online and also like the true crime of it all.
Well, you also ruined the twist for me, so I appreciate that, which I think basically kind of ruined the documentary by ruining the twist.
I mean, you have to really be offline to not have seen what happened.
So why don't we give like a 2-minute overview of what it's about? And for people who haven't seen it and don't want to be spoiled, watch the documentary first and then come back and listen to this podcast because we are going to talk about spoilers. So it starts off as like a pretty typical cyberbullying documentary, which unfortunately is all too common in the world these days. 14-year-old girl is in a relationship for a couple years with a boy in her school in a very small town. I forget what state it was in.
It's Beale City, Michigan, a very small town in the Midwestern southern tip of the state.
So, and that's important for a few reasons that I want to get back to later. Small town, one school, everybody goes to the same school. And all of a sudden, the girl begins to get very aggressive, nasty text messages, which kind of increase in intensity as the show goes on, that appear to be trying to interject between her relationship with, the girl's name is Lauren, her relationship with her boyfriend, Owen. Although all the messages appear to be group text messages where both Lauren and Owen are on the messages, maybe sometimes other kids as well. It wasn't entirely clear to me. And the messages kind of go on forever for like a year, basically too long before police get involved. The police appears to be one person in this town who also doesn't seem to know how to investigate what's going on. And eventually, after a lot of ineffectual investigative activity, they bring in the FBI, who like in basically a day figures out that it's Lauren's mom who has been catfishing her and Owen, and that's revealed like 2/3 of the way through the documentary, and the fallout is kind of what consists of the last third of the documentary. I guess why don't we start big picture? Jason, when you watch this, what were your immediate reactions? How do you think this falls into like fits into the current zeitgeist of, we all know about cyberbullying, and social media addiction. How do you think this kind of fits into the zeitgeist? Why did it touch a nerve with the Netflix viewing public?
Can I jump in with something else first and then answer that? I just want to say that you mentioned that you had already seen the spoiler before you watched it. I had too. I knew who had done it, but I watched it with my wife and she had not seen it. She had not heard anything about it. And so she was on the couch going and just couldn't believe that it was the mom. And I knew it was coming all along. So I'm like, just keep watching, keep watching, keep watching.
What I was going to say at the beginning is, it felt to me almost like the structure was like an M. Night Shyamalan movie, because it felt very much like it was all centered around the twist. And we can talk about like what that meant for the documentary. And I had some issues with the documentary itself, but that moment to me is exactly like why the documentary hit so big. But I'm curious to hear whether you agree or disagree.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you mentioned the current zeitgeist and our obsession with cell phones and social media. And I've got mine with me now. We probably all do, but I teach at a university, and so my students constantly have their phones. And I know this is an issue in high schools as well. Some states or districts are banning them from schools, and it's just something that it's like you can't seem to separate the teen from their phone, or realistically, adults from their phone either. I'm not going to lie. So I think that one of the things that makes this so attractive, there is a true crime here. It's not a grisly murder crime. It's not a serial rapist crime, but it's something that I think resonates because we realize, ooh, that could be my kid. Somebody could do that to my kid. My kid's always got their phone with them. What if someone does that here? So I think that does resonate with a lot of viewers, and it really just kind of makes for my wife's case, the mama bear hackles stand up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's right. Let's talk about the true crime aspect of it first. I wonder if, as well, social media is already insanely prevalent, but I wonder if as more and more people begin to leverage phones, internet, social media to commit crimes, because crimes are going to happen less often in person because people are just interacting less often in person. So people are increasingly going to leverage social media to commit crimes. Is this going to be like the new true crime? The next 5 to 7 years are going to be about crime committed over the internet, crime committed on social media. It seems like this is kind of the tip of the iceberg in some ways.
Yeah, I think sometimes you get all these things, and I think that we still a lot of times, as you know from being a Newhouse graduate, the agenda for the public is often still set by the media, and so I think anytime something new comes along, then and some crime is associated with that, the media are going to jump all over that. Do you remember when an Uber driver killed somebody in Western Michigan? He went on a shooting spree. This is like 10 years ago, but that was all over it. If an Uber driver did something, because Uber was new, they
Yeah.
were completely in the news for that. If you see cyberbullying on Roblox, which is another popular video game for younger kids, cyberbullying comes up on that, and boom, everybody's talking about Roblox. And if we go back to media history, we can see that this is the case with all media. When rock and roll music came out, people were saying this is from the devil. Comic books came out. Oh, this is going to ruin our children because of these scantily clad women in these drawings, right? So anytime we get some kind of new medium and something happens like that.
I wanted to talk really quickly about the storytelling in the show. I think when we start talking about it, I'm going to kind of interject with some thoughts on some of the legal aspects. Raquel and I were talking about this beforehand. I didn't know anything about this documentary. I had some problems with the storytelling, but I'm curious to hear, given that you are a documentary filmmaker and this is what you do for a living, what your feeling was in the story itself.
Well, I always watch things, and my students get mad at me because they always say, I can't just watch a movie or a documentary anymore because of all the stuff you taught me. But you've got to use your mind on multiple channels while you're doing this. So I'm watching it to see how they interview people, how they set up the lighting. I'm watching it to see how they put the story together in order. Because one of the biggest things, probably the biggest hook in this, is the fact that it turns out to be the mom. It's the surprise twist if you don't know the story. And the way they set it up is brilliant because they always throw the suspicion at the other possible people that it might be. Now, everyone who participated in that knew the outcome already. It was shocking to me when I first turned it on and I saw the mom being interviewed. I'm like, wait a second, isn't she in jail?
Yeah, I was
But
surprised. I thought there was going to be a reveal where they pan out and it was like she was in a prison or something.
and it never happened. But that twist is kind of what keeps it going. You've got to build that suspense. You've got to take us up and down on the journey of the story's arc, and then you get to that spot. And I don't want to. I don't want to jump ahead. You might be asking me this, so I'll just save this comment for a little later about the reveal when that actually did happen. So if you want to save that for later, I'm not sure when you want to bring that up in the podcast.
Let's talk about it now, because I think it's interesting to talk about it with you, and then Raquel had a different point of view, and I want to hear Raquel's point of view too. It sounds like you were appreciating a level of this is a film noir. This is a mystery box, and the way that they structured the mystery box was really skillful, and the reveal was really skillful. I was viewing it from the vantage point of this is a really important issue that I care about because my kids are in school, and I thought that there were some aspects of that were not explored as carefully as I would have liked. But from your perspective, and I didn't really think of it this way, yeah, if you're looking at it as thrill-seeking mystery box, propulsive energy from scene to scene, I would agree it did do that well.
Right. And I think that documentary film goes about it in a different way than journalism. I come from a journalism background, and that kind of propelled me into documentary film as well as academia. But with a journalist, you kind of have a set formula of how you tell the story. But documentary filmmakers have a lot more creativity, a lot more creative leeway, I should say. And they're not constrained by the same ethical guidelines that a bona fide journalist is. They're allowed to do what we call the creative treatment of reality. That's kind of the definition of a documentary film. So being creative with this and deliberately, I see it as deliberately omitting some key details. And when you watch the end of it, in kind of the aftermath of the case, and you hear some of these other people talking like, oh, if the sheriff had only done his job, like I told him, like, so it seems like other people did know this outcome even way before it was official, right? Other people were suspicious of this, but it wasn't, we weren't directed that way. Our attention was kind of like with the magician here. Watch me pull this rabbit out of my hat. You're looking at the one hand and then he's doing something with the other hand. Right. So it's a distraction technique, which brings up that suspense and builds us up for that moment of the reveal, which was bizarre. Just I can't believe that Lauren, the daughter, just kind of took it like that. That was the most shocking thing in the film to me. It was it makes me wonder almost as if she kind of knew.
I want to get back to that. We were talking about that beforehand. I do want to get back to that, but I want to also touch on what you talked about, which I think is right, with the sleight of hand and using creative license to misdirect. Now that I'm thinking about it, I am appreciating a little bit more, because when you think about the typical like murder mystery show, detective show, I'm thinking of Mayor of Easttown, for example. I don't know if you saw that show with Kate Winslet. The series are structured so that every episode you begin to think that like somebody else is a suspect, and then the suspect is kind of cleared by the end of the episode or the beginning of the following episode. And then at the end, it's somebody you didn't really expect, who was kind of like hiding in the foreground the entire time. Like it's obvious in retrospect, but wasn't apparent while you were watching. That probably, because I knew the twist beforehand, thanks a lot, Raquel, that probably did take away some of that appreciation for me, because I was no longer thinking about it from a whodunit perspective. I was thinking about it from a, what are they trying to tell me with this documentary? What am I trying to understand? What am I trying to learn? Where's the messaging? And that part was missing for me. Raquel, when you watched it, did you know the twist or no?
So when I watched it, I knew, but when I was watching it, I guess I was just watching it and it did feel more of like a movie than a documentary. But when I was watching the documentary and I saw all of the students that she was sort of pinpointing, and the mother was like directing the police attention towards different students and different friends, I was watching it knowing that the mom was the one sending all of these text messages and saying like, she's evil. Like she's trying to place the blame on these other 15-year-old students. She knows all of their schedules. She knows that they're in, I forgot if she played soccer or basketball, but like they play sports together. And if I send this one text message, then it will direct the police to look at this student. And sort of when I was watching it, it wasn't I knew who did it. So I wasn't like, oh, is it this girl? Is it this boy? Is it this girl? Butch friend group? Like I was watching it as like, wow, this mother is so twisted that she knows exactly what to say. She knows exactly how to direct this investigation. And she was manipulating all of them. And similarly, like you, Jason, I was watching it with my husband who didn't know who it was.
You ruined it for me, but not for him. How do you pick and choose who you spoil things for,
I didn't,
Raquel?
I don't know. I guess like he was like falling asleep a little bit also like on the couch while we were watching it. And all of a sudden, like the mom revealed it was her and he like woke up and he was like, oh my God, I can't believe she did that. I might have told him who it was and he might have just not remembered because like sometimes he doesn't remember these things. But I just thought the mom was like really evil and I couldn't believe that Lauren like went back to her as soon as she did. And then later on in the documentary, like sort of explained how she has this like weird relationship with her mom now, which in all fairness, like it should be a weird relationship. Like her mom sent some pretty disturbing text messages to her.
The most vile, heinous text messages imaginable. Let's go back to the twist reveal, Jason. I do want to get your your impressions and kind of explore a little bit further whether or not Lauren might have known, because there is like a seedling of that in one of, I think it's Sophie's parents at the end or Chloe's parents, one of the sets of parents at the end, kind of mention it in passing, but it's left unexplored. I don't know if that was intentional, whether they just didn't have any other stuff to add to that. But walk us through like your impressions on the reveal, how it was filmed, how it was captured. It's amazing. Like I think the police got incredibly lucky that she confessed so quickly because they were doing like a bumbling, horrible job, which I can talk about a little bit. But Jason, give us your impressions on that part of the film.
Yeah, I was telling Axios Detroit when I talked about it with them, and that's how you got my contact info. But it was that scene.
We actually got your contact information from Kendra. She found your number and gave it to us.
Well, tell Kendra thank you. But the fact that they have body camera footage of that captured on, I mean, that is what they would call the money shot. That's the you can't get this. You've got to have the original. You've got to have those live reactions, and that just makes the whole thing real. That's what kind of sells it, I think, more than anything else. And it was just bizarre to see that, like you mentioned, with the police, the uh, the sheriff. I think it was the sheriff himself, right? You said it was a one law enforcement officer in the whole town or county, maybe.
And there was actually a guy who I thought was much better, who was like threatening to rip the entire house apart, which I
Well,
thought was
yeah, yeah. I don't want to do this, but I will if you don't tell me where the phone is, right? And so, yeah, she admitted that she was lying to him. Oh, wait, yeah, I have that other phone, right? I forgot about that. But it was, he almost walked in. The sheriff walked in almost apologetically, like, "I'm really sorry we have to do this," almost like they were friends, and maybe they were, which wasn't revealed. But he did say that she had worked closely with his office to try to kind of find out how the investigation was going. So they had certainly built some kind of relationship. But he went in there apologetically and like, "I'm really sorry we have to do this. Well, I'm afraid we won't be able to keep it a secret, but," and she still spilled the beans there, which was great. And the prosecutor came on and said it's not a very clear confession, but you can certainly read it as a confession.
I thought it was pretty clear. As a former prosecutor, I would have been like, this is deeper than this, at least without like a full interrogation, which this wasn't. Like that, he asked one question, and she didn't fess up to all of the messages, but she fessed up to essentially enough to, you know, uh, prove the crime had been committed.
Right. And then the other thing was, like you mentioned, with the FBI solving it in essentially a day or two, right? So why couldn't the sheriff have gotten subpoenas from these companies? Why couldn't the sheriff have gone through these records? This seems like something that law enforcement agencies, regardless of whether they're federal or local, should have the ability for legal matters to subpoena these records. And I think that was where you get Chloe's dad at the end kind of ranting about how the sheriff didn't do his job. And that was something that that the viewer didn't know about until we saw him saying that at the end. So I totally believe that he and his wife suspected Kendra all along.
Right. As someone with a law enforcement background, I immediately was like, what are they doing? Why are they like looking at surveillance footage of people texting on the phone and trying to match it up to the text messages? How much time are they wasting? How much effort are they wasting? You just go to the phone company, send a subpoena, get the IP information, and you basically have it with one subpoena. So I thought that this would have been, maybe this is my own biases creeping in, a little bit more compelling if at least part of the documentary was focused on how rural communities, small towns, the kids in those towns, the people in those towns are a little underserved by law enforcement given lack of resources, lack of experience, lack of training. Like this, to your point, this could be happening to other kids and other families, and there's just not the law enforcement support system to help as efficiently and productively as possible. This should not have gone on for a year. This should have gone on for a week, 2 weeks, a month at most. And the fact that it went on for a year and probably caused like long-term trauma to all of these kids and all these families is an indictment of the systems in these communities. That to me was more compelling and interesting than some of the other stuff that I saw.
I also felt as if Owen's mother wasn't the one pushing the sheriff and pushing the people at the school district to sort of investigate, then they would have just let it happen. If she wasn't advocating for her son, then maybe they wouldn't even have gotten the FBI involved, and it would be going on for a longer period of time.
And I think this is a good segue to whether Lauren knew and whether the dad even knew. You know, going back to that reveal scene when the police showed up, if they didn't if the dad hadn't come home and knew about the extra phone because they were doing such a superficial investigation at the scene, they never would have even gotten the evidence they needed because they just relied on what this woman was this obvious liar was telling them about like where all of her stuff was. And it wasn't, they didn't even think to like actually do a real search or even ask Lauren whether or not she had other electronic devices until the dad came back. So they got incredibly lucky. And it's possible there's an if she was a little cagier and the dad came home and wanted to help cover it up or didn't have all the information, you might not even be looking at a conviction here.
Yeah, for sure. And like you mentioned earlier, the fact that he went in there with the kid gloves and it was the other officer or the other deputy that was like, we'll rip this house apart to find it if you don't tell us. Then she just kind of went along with it. But you're right. If the husband hadn't come home and said, well, what about your other phone? Then, oh, you have another phone? Oh, wait, I forgot. Yeah, I do. That was also captured on that body cam footage, which makes it again from a documentary standpoint, that is gold. Anytime you don't have to reenact something, anytime you've got the actual footage, that is absolutely key in selling a documentary.
I want to circle back to the point that you raised before about whether Lauren knew based on her reaction, and then that little seedling of a comment made by was it Chloe's parents towards the end of the documentary where they say, you know, I think the mom basically implies that she thought Lauren and the dad were involved too, or at least had knowledge of what was going on. And it's never mentioned before or after again. It's kind of left hanging there. I'm curious if you thought that was intentional, and if it was intentional, why wasn't it addressed in some other way? Well, what do you think the decision making there was?
I think it comes back down to storytelling is what I think. So you've got to kind of create a sympathetic character, which is Lauren.
Right.
And if you can paint her out as this innocent victim for the whole movie, I think that kind of builds that audience support for her and hoping that this will end for her.
I felt like the dad was the more of the sympathetic character in the movie. She's kind of ice cold throughout from beginning to end. You feel bad for her because she's in this like awful family situation, but there's no real doesn't really show a lot of emotion. Whereas, the dad, he wears it on his sleeve throughout, basically.
Right. Yeah, and he seemed those reactions he had seemed pretty genuine. The anger and the shock that she had done it and that she had lost her jobs that she said she was still working, despite the fact that they'd had financial issues. I mean, wouldn't you look at the bank accounts and, honey, show me your pay stub kind of thing?
Yeah. I think it speaks to, and again, this was not borne out that well to my mind, but also, you want to make it an hour and a half tight documentary, how duplicitous she was. Like, it wasn't just this. Like, if it was just this, then maybe some of her like woe is me stories have some effect. But the fact that she was like clearly lying to everybody about everything at all times, including her husband, putting on this front to the police, it totally undercuts all of her credibility. And I want to ask you about that because did you think that the filmmakers did enough? And I know this was a story that was out there. You think the filmmakers did enough to kind of confront her, press her? Like, she was obviously a very willing participant. It looked like she was willing to talk for hours about this, and she was like, she filmed cutaway scenes for them. Like, it seemed like she was willing to do whatever that she wanted them to do. Is that because they built that rapport and that's why? And if they had pressed too hard, it would have went in the other direction. What do you think was the reasoning here? Because they really don't. They get her to say a couple of things organically that seem insane, but they don't really confront her with some of the even the message. Why did you tell your daughter to kill herself? And like really press her on that one line. They don't do that. So I was wondering why.
I've got a couple thoughts on that. One is I think they might not have wanted her to cut off the interview, but like you said, she was such a willing participant, which leads me to think, uh, and along with the other things, that she's probably a very high level narcissist who just desperately craves attention and wants everything to be about her. And I think that that is a reason that a lot of people would be willing to go on camera, even if they're the perpetrators, even if they're the people who are the bad guys. They still want to get their side out because this is ultimately about them.
Yeah. I felt a lot of parallels to Bob Durst when I was watching her from the Jinx. It felt like there seemed to be a lot of similarities in how they were speaking, how they were making excuses, like using this platform as an opportunity to try to convince people of their version of events. So that makes sense to me. Anything that you would have, I know you don't want to second guess your peers too much, but anything you would have done differently in approaching the story? Do you think there were other angles that would have been more interesting, or do you think that this was kind of an A+ job, and there wasn't too much that you would have changed in shaping the source material or presenting it to the viewer?
Yeah, great question. And I've been kind of comparing this one in my mind to a couple of the documentaries that I've watched in the last year or so, maybe a couple years. But one is called Three Identical Strangers. I don't know if you've seen that one. It's about these three triplets separated at birth. And when they're in college, two of them run into each other and it gets publicized in a newspaper. And so he goes to his community college and finds his long lost brother that he never knew he had. So there's a newspaper article about that. And then the triplet sees the newspaper article and then says, hey, I think I'm their brother too. And so you kind of get that, you close that part of the story up front. And so now everybody knows, hey, these were three brothers separated at birth. So how do you drag this out for another hour? Right? You got to the payoff, but they had a really great way of doing it where they just kind of kept moving it along in different ways, along different twists and turns. And it just made a really fascinating outcome at the end and kind of a tragic outcome at the end, but it was very fascinating. And I was kind of watching this, thinking along those lines. And when I watched Kendra, the mom, being interviewed, I was thinking of another one that I watched. I can't remember the name of it, and I should have Googled it before I came on, but it was a documentary about Hillsong Church. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a big evangelical church from Australia. But then they've got a church, I was going to say a branch, a church in Manhattan.
It's called The Secrets of Hillsong, just in case people want to see it.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I won't spoil it, but one of the Or maybe I will spoil it, sorry. It's brilliantly told, it's brilliantly told, and I went into it with a very, very skeptical attitude looking toward it. And my wife was just fascinated by it, so we watched it again. Well, she watched it again, and I saw them interview this pastor that had been, at the center of this scandal, and he did the same thing that Kendra did at the end. He came back on, he was very sincere, looked at the camera, and just kind of spoke from the heart. And I'm sitting here watching this, knowing that he's admitted to being a narcissist, but also knowing that he's trying to craft a narrative for some kind of redemption story for his own career. And so I'm watching this and seeing how well he does at building himself as this flawed but yet somehow sympathetic character that people can like again and perhaps someday trust again. So that was, I thought, brilliantly done too. And I think in this case, I wouldn't change a thing about the storytelling. I think you've got to leave out some details. If you're a prosecutor or an attorney, you want to have every single detail so that you can know how the story goes. You can know what's right, know what's wrong, know what's just, know what's not. And for viewers, as a documentary filmmaker, you kind of want to leave those things for them. That's another difference between journalism and documentary film. With documentary film, you kind of want to leave those questions so people might go back and revisit and watch it again. With broadcast news, as you know from Syracuse, you've got to tell the story and write it for the lowest common denominator, right? You've got to have the story told in the inverted pyramid style. You've got to get the details, all the who, what, where, when, why, and you've got to have those, and they've got to all match up so that people, when they're done, there's no doubt about what the story was. But for documentary, you do want to leave a little doubt. You do want to leave people questioning. You kind of want to leave that hunger in their mouth for more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I think what you were talking about with respect to the Hillsong documentary beats back a little of my criticism also, because perhaps they did play around with making the reveal happen up front, but then you're giving her a platform to explain herself for the rest of the film versus having the audience sympathize with all the victims, almost channeling Jill's energy of saying this person needs to be held accountable for what they did. I'm sure if you're watching and you might not even know if they ever catch the person, right? At a certain point, you're like, this seems like it's impossible. So if they structured it the other way, there's an hour and a half of runway for her to like convince people that she was right, which certainly they didn't. That wasn't the message of the movie in any way whatsoever. Um, so that's an interesting way to look at how they. I don't know if they thought about that, but it makes sense from a storytelling perspective. Raquel, what did you think of the documentary overall?
I liked it. I mean, I thought she is like a sick individual. I think she needs a lot of help. Watching it, knowing that she was the one sending the text messages and seeing all the text messages in the context of like, I can't believe someone's mother is sending them this. I can't believe she's telling her daughter to kill herself. And the only time that I felt sort of pressed by the interviewer that was interviewing Kendra was, I think she said, and I watched it a couple weeks ago, but she said, like, what would you have done if your daughter did kill herself? Because also seeing Lauren's social life, it didn't really look like she had that much of a solid friend group. It seemed like she really only had her boyfriend, and then her mother took that away from her and sort of like ruined her life by pointing fingers at other girls who then in turn wouldn't want to be friends with Lauren. So I think, I mean, I don't think she has any redeeming qualities. I don't think she explained herself in any way. I couldn't believe what I was watching when I was reading as I was watching it. I thought that some things that the school district said about like not being able to take away the phones. I thought that the schools weren't doing enough because I went to high school and elementary school and people had phones. So like when we came to school, we had to put our phones in a box and they were locked away and we didn't see them the whole entire day. And like, why do you need a phone? You're in school. You're supposed to be learning. Your friends are with you. You don't need to be like texting and on Instagram all day.
I thought in terms of investigating, they could have on a random day Everybody comes in, there's somebody waiting there saying, give us your phones. And if they do that and the messages are still coming in, they know that it's somebody not in the school at that point. And if they don't happen that day, they know that it's somebody in the school. So just a way to kind of narrow the field. I didn't understand why the school didn't do that. You didn't take it permanently away, but as an investigative tool, that didn't make any sense to me versus like their weird surveillance matchup strategy that they had. Any final thoughts, Jason, about the documentary?
No, I would just say I would recommend watching it, even if you know what happened in the story. Just as I tell my students, think about the way that the storyteller does move us through from one thing to another, and think about ways that you could do it differently, questions you could ask, and maybe why would you put the answer here and not put the answer there. So those are things that I look at when I'm watching, and I tell my students to do as well.
Well, this is great, Jason. If people want to read more stuff you've done, watch stuff you've made, where should they go? Where should they go? What should they do?
I've got a documentary called Stealing Home. It tells the story of a bunch of amateur groundskeepers who try to take over the abandoned ball field at Tiger Stadium in Detroit. The stadium was torn down, weeds grew up, and this group of volunteers came in and turned it back into a ballpark against the city's wishes. The city threatened to arrest them and give them trespassing tickets. And everybody else in the community said it was a great thing that they were doing, and it lasted for 6 or 7 years before the city redeveloped the land. And it's a pretty fascinating documentary. It's called Stealing Home, and it's on Vimeo. You can look it up there.
Awesome. I'll definitely check that out. Sounds great. Well, Jason, thanks for coming on. There's no dearth of documentaries coming out on Netflix and other streaming platforms, so we'd love to have you come back on in the future to talk about another one.
Well, thanks so much. I greatly appreciate it. Good to meet you, Raquel and Lee.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
For more on all things real estate and the law, subscribe to this and our other podcasts. Follow Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Polina on social media. Subscribe to our newsletter and go to bfklawoffice.com. That's bfklawoffice.com to learn more.